All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. It looks like we have people trickling in now. So really appreciate you guys taking the time to join us today. And hopefully, if you are, you'll be able to learn a little bit something. This webinar is going to be recorded so that our attendees who were not able to make it live will be able to see it afterwards. So do just keep that in mind. As we go ahead, you guys are more than welcome to send any questions you have in the chat, and we'll have Anders and Amanda take care of them at the end in Q&A. Any thoughts, questions, additional info you guys have, please feel free to share. We'll go ahead and get started, and I'll let Amanda and Anders introduce themselves, and we'll go ahead with all the submitted questions.
All right. Anders, first of all, thank you for inviting me to do this with you. This is a lot of fun today to have an open Q&A. So a lot of the Q&As that are the questions that we're going through were actually solicited through LinkedIn, which was a lot of fun. So I'm just excited to be here. So a little bit about me. I'm going to hold off like some of the Wonder Services stuff for the first question that we go through, but Amanda Prochaska, I'm the Chief Wonder Officer of Wonder Services and was in procurement for 16 years. And that's all I'm going to say. And I will keep the rest for later.
All right. Well, I guess maybe I'll be coy as well then. And
all right.
Introduce myself as Anders Lillevik, Chief Executive Officer and founder of Focal Point. And my procurement career started in 1997. So that makes it quite a while now.
Yeah.
But I look forward to having a discussion also. It's great to have you here with us.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
All right.
So Maya, do you want to advance the slide?
Let's go ahead and get started with question one. Just a quick reminder, if you do want to join us on LinkedIn to keep the conversation up, feel free to do so. And all right, we'll get into question one.
Yeah, so I decided to start Focal Point after having spent a lot of time in procurement as a practitioner. And the thing that I recognized was that procurement as a discipline was getting more and more complex and complicated. So when I started in procurement in 97, we did everything in Excel and email because the process was relatively simple. And now, as you sort of, number one, you start layering in the risk stuff you need to do and the diversity stuff you need to do, and all the things that are required of us from outside forces like compliance, ESG, audit, risk, security, IT. There are tons and tons of solutions that do these kinds of things. But if you're running a best-in-class organization, you probably have at least 10 different systems you bounce in and out of on a daily basis. And that makes it extremely challenging to figure out exactly how things are done, how to collaborate with stakeholders when you have 10 different spots to collaborate in or get information from and process out of. So I created a Focal Point back into 2020, right before the pandemic started, to really bridge those gaps and be a layer the system between all these systems and create one point, a focal point, if you will, where everything can be done right from intake until counting the savings. Because I saw the need out there. It was really too big for me to pass up. And I really think as I get into this, it's all about enhancing the role of procurement in organizations, right? Number one, you want to create a better user experience for procurement professionals, but also add more value to the business as and when needed. And I think that is the difference for Focal Point with a lot of other providers out there. Is we were founded by procurement folks with procurement folks in mind. And I talk about this, here, but I talk about that with our customers, with our prospects, and everybody else as well. I don't want to sell, for example, our solution if it's not the right fit, because at the end of the day, it's all about value, right? And that's all we have to go on. So that's really why I decided to start Focal Point. How about you, Amanda?
Anders, as you were mentioning that, first of all, I think we're very much aligned with the reason why we decided to start our businesses. But I was reflecting back on when I first got into procurement doing an RFP, and it was all paper back then. So we would get like these huge binders of RFP responses, and then you had to walk them around to your stakeholders. And then once you got all the evaluations back, you had to find where to store them all. Things have changed quite a bit since then, luckily. But I started Wonder Services 4.5 years ago, and I actually left my dream job. I was a VP of procurement at MGM Resorts International, and I was open about that dream job with a lot of people. I would say it in speaking engagements that I built a beautiful team of people. They're just absolutely amazingly talented people. Was able to do a lot of transformation within MGM, but I always had this kind of itch for entrepreneurship, and I thought it was going to be like later on in my career. But what I started realizing, kind of like you, Anders, was that there was this transformation going on within procurement where we were getting a lot more accountability. Alongside of that accountability came many more systems to deploy, potentially in your landscape. And my concern was really around the user adoption of those, right? So I was having some success in driving change, but I was hearing across the industry that it was really, really hard with suppliers, with your internal users. And I was like, darn, we're finally getting money, right? We're finally getting investment into procurement. And we have all of these wonderful tools that will enable us to be successful. But if we don't get people to use them, it's going to be very, very difficult. So I love what you're doing at Focal Point, because it kind of brings all of that together into one user experience. And the more and more that we can think about what is that user experience in procurement, the better off we're going to be as things continue to get more complicated. And I guess we get more and more scope creep within what we're doing within procurement. But that's why I did it. And I've been doing that for 4.5 years with our Wonder Services team, and helping companies be successful in their technology deployments and beyond.
It's interesting, Amanda. I had absolutely no aspirations for entrepreneurial
Oh, really?
pursuits. I had none. So, I always wanted to be a procurement guy once I got into it. But once I sort of looked at the opportunity and how we could change the world, so to speak, I couldn't hold back. So
Yeah. The passion for procurement really makes a difference, right? I think both of us at the end of the day want procurement to be successful, and found different paths forward to make that happen.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Super, super neat. All right. So let's move on to question 2. What is procurement's role in mitigating vendor risk?
Oh, so Anders, I'm going to start with this one. And the first reaction I had to this question is, I think we first have to define what vendor risk is, right? Because when I was still as a practitioner, vendor risk was very much focused on financials, right? We were looking at financial risk of suppliers and making sure that we didn't have conflict of interest in our supply chain and stuff like that. But over the last several years, I mean, that's just rapidly expanded into all kinds of different areas: geopolitical risk, supply chain risk. You even have ESG coming in, I think, a little bit more into the vendor risk space. So as a procurement organization, I think first we have to define what vendor risk is for our company, so that we can clearly understand what our role is. But our role, if we look at it, I've always said this from the early on in my career, I always looked at procurement's role as being a manager of all of our third party entities, right? So if you think about actively managing your third parties, your suppliers, procurement has a primary role in mitigating that risk, I think, for organizations, however you define it. But the definition, I think, is the most important part at this moment in time, so we can clearly understand what we're trying to go after. Anders, what do you think?
No, I think you're bang on. I think ultimately procurement is the execution arm of, as they often are, in other people's processes, right? So
Yep.
ultimately the chief risk officer will lay out risk frameworks, and that's oftentimes handed down by regulators or by other governing bodies or the board. And then procurement then gets to sort of say, well, how are we going to measure supplier risk? How are we going to measure inherent risk versus residual risk? And we often get to execute on that stuff and being the arms and legs for the business who ultimately are responsible for that risk. So I think we think about this a lot more than the chief risk officer does, on a low level.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I don't think the business cares about it half as much as we do as well. So I think ultimately, we get to come up with good ideas and executing those good ideas, but certainly under the auspices of a general risk management program that your companies have. And I think, and it's the same thing with, for example, when you talk about information security or any other governance function like that, they sort of say, here's the stuff you need to subject our vendors to, or your, potential vendors to. And then we get to be the goalie of the javelin team that goes in and sort of puts these things in front of people. But, we're executing on a process that has been given to us to execute rather than something that we come up with. And I think sometimes that's fair, sometimes it's not.
Yeah. And I think I hear often in the procurement world, Anders, that procurement sometimes is seen as a black hole, right? Where stuff comes in and they have no idea what's going on. But I think a lot of what is going on during those circumstances is that we are trying to go through all of the appropriate channels to make sure that, at least as we're engaging with that supplier for the first time or during a renewal, that we are trying to mitigate those risks. And then you have to go through, and once you engage with that supplier, obviously continue to mitigate those risks. But I think there's just a lot of touch points within an organization that we have to have those relationships with and go through the needed steps and needed conversations to make sure that everyone's aware of the risks that are at hand or how we're going to mitigate them.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Thanks for talking on that. I feel like you guys could talk a lot longer on that.
Yeah.
It's a chunky topic. But for right now, we'll push on to question 3. Let's see. What is the next big challenge that procurement technology will tackle?
I can sort of go, right? I think nobody really knows, right, what the world's going to do in the next 2 hours, probably. So I think ultimately, that remains to be seen. I think what we're seeing out there now is there's a certain shift away from these legacy large systems, and there are technologies coming in that sort of streamlines things more efficiently and effectively for better user experience. And I think that will continue to be the case because obviously everybody wants better user experience. But I think, ultimately facilitating the actual hardcore sourcing and procurement processes is where I think the gold are in the hills, right? Because I think, if you do the 78-step sourcing methodology and you have to jump systems 80 times, that continues to be a challenge for people. So I think the user experience, not only for business users, but also for procurement users, needs to be taken into consideration. I think that's certainly where I think it's going, obviously, right? But in terms of what the market or what regulators are going to throw at us next, I'm not entirely sure. And I think that's ultimately, what drives innovation to some extent as well. And that's without going too specific.
So, Anders, I'm laughing over here because I'm going to give you some major kudos for not dropping AI in your answer. Not even mentioning it. That's really, really good. And I really appreciate that. I'm not being sarcastic about it because I think there's a lot of conversation going on about that. And we'll get to a question, I think, a little bit later on specifically about that. But I agree with you, Anders. I think a lot of the focus right now, I would say, are on 2 different areas. And I talk to a lot of procure tech startups with what I do, and have the pleasure of chatting with a lot of people throughout the industry. And I'm hearing 2 main things. One being the intake and orchestration of procurement. So very much what Focal Point is focusing on within your solution. But I think it's really that need that we have. And I'll give an example of I was talking to a procurement organization several months ago, and they had 15 different buying channels. Okay, which I think, I mean, at first glance I was like, well, that is a lot. Like that feels very complicated. But once we started diving in, I was like, oh yeah, well, it all makes sense. And there's probably several people that are listening to this live or on the recording that probably have similar situations. Well, even your big end-to-end solutions, they don't really tackle that very well. They assume that through when a user logs in, that they somewhat know where they're going, where they really don't, and they really don't want to know. They don't want to have to know. They want to just be guided into the right place so that they can make the right purchase, so they can get whatever they're doing for their day job done. Right? It's really that simple. So that's one part of that orchestration. You could also be talking about intake, like, hey, I just need to get this done and I don't even know where to start, or I don't know where to go. Could be various different places within your procurement process. So I really love this whole seamless, user-centric intake orchestration concept that is coming forth within procurement. In fact, I don't know, I think, Anders, you saw Jason Bush just posted a beautiful post on LinkedIn about this, about things that people should be considering when it comes to intake orchestration. So really, really think that that's the next big thing within procurement technology. The second area is, like, there are so many people out there that are trying to solve for supplier insights right now. And I feel like it's all kinds of different angles that people are coming in to this from. So I feel like supplier insights is the next big thing that's going to be tackled within procurement too, is how do we make sure that we have all of the right data in kind of a centralized location where we can make decisions off of those insights, because it could range from not just the traditional, like, how much should I spend with the supplier, but what is that supplier's outlook? What are they doing? What are their next big products? Are they in different locations that we should be concerned of? You know, there's all kinds of different things that you can think about for suppliers. What not, you know, when their contracts coming up is a pretty simple one too. But those two things I think are the big things: intake orchestration, and then also actionable supplier insights. Sorry, that was
So
really long-winded, but I'm very passionate about this.
so two very different things on the opposite side of the spectrum.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I think they could potentially, like, feed each
They
other,
will,
right?
they will
Yeah, at
intersect
the
for
end of the
sure.
day. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, super interesting. And I think it's very procurement themed that both of you had an answer that was ultimately we want to make things easier for the business user. I think that's very procurement minded.
Correct.
But absolutely super interesting. So let's move on to question 4, which is going to be, how are procurement departments measuring value? What KPIs may they be using beyond just the traditional cost savings?
Yeah, so this is a bit of a hot button issue for me, right? Because some organizations look at procurement performance as a unidimensional thing, which is measured by cost savings. And we've been driven by that for so long in this industry, but I think, as we talked about earlier, we have to do so much more now, that being that unidimensional is not a good idea, generally speaking. So what I always say is, like, if you don't measure it, no one's going to care about it. And if you don't measure it, you're not going to be able to impact it, right? So a couple of things that I want to think about as we're setting up your procurement performance management is, think about something like a net promoter score. Not a net promoter score survey that you do once a year to executives, right? But people
Hey, Anders.
people
Oh,
that are interacting
yeah.
with procurement on a daily basis, how are they feeling about the interactions they're having with procurement? Another KPI is, how long are the cycle times? Like, how long does it actually take? And then who actually has the ball most of the time through the journey, right? You can also measure things like supplier diversity or carbon footprint. All those kinds of things are also important KPIs. Something I would love to measure, but it's hard to because it's squishy, is the whole aspect of risk, right? Because you're never really done. So I think, the world's your oyster there. But again, the problem has been typically, in my opinion, is that with so many disparate systems and so many disparate things and processes, it's kind of hard to get your arms around it all. But I think the time has come now for us to really start thinking about what are the leading metrics of a procurement organization today.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And this is one I'm going to focus on just cost savings right now, because I would like to see a major a shift in cost savings metrics too. Let's just, in addition to everything that you just said, Anders, I think the way that we've been focused on cost savings is cutting us very, very short. And I would love to see something like gross margin improvement instead of cost savings. Gross margin improvement, because here's the thing. We have a completely untapped, well, I shouldn't say completely, but a largely untapped resource in our suppliers, where we could be driving innovation, we could be driving revenue, we could be doing all kinds of other activities with those suppliers to drive top line in an organization, to drive revenue. And because we've been so focused on cost savings, those activities have not been a priority. They have not been a focus. So I would love to be able to see organizations move to that gross margin metric. So it opens up all of those new doors for creative solutions, creative ways to drive revenue and or cost savings. But it's really about how do we effectively tap into the capability of our suppliers to drive business success and drive share and drive competitive advantage.
Yeah, and also, you're absolutely right. And oftentimes I think about, like, for example, how much capital do we free up by either negotiating payment terms and then enforcing payment terms? Two different
That's
things.
another one.
Keep that in mind, right?
Yes, they are.
Right. So I think ultimately, like, you have to sort of set up the goals and figure out how you're going to track them. But it's a target-rich environment of which we have a long way to go.
Yeah, and it's ripe for creative leadership right now to set new expectations for their teams and come up with these revised KPIs that are truly business focused and user centric focused, I think, is what we're coming down to.
For sure. And really
Yeah.
neat that procurement is a really creative space, and having the opportunity to be involved in creating those KPIs and is really neat. And I see Ernie's in the chat as well. Looks like he agrees with you too. So all right, let's move on to the next question. I know we could talk about all these a lot longer, but question 5, which we alluded to before, but of course we couldn't leave AI out of the conversation. How might we see AI impacting procurement's efficacy going forward?
Oh, okay. So Anders, I'm gonna kick this one off if you don't mind. So I think AI is already impacting procurement, right? The capability is out there today where you can use AI to identify suppliers who might be a good fit for whatever need you have. You can understand suppliers a lot better. So for instance, I was just on a demo with someone else where they were taking us through, you could look up a list of suppliers, you could understand their financials, you could understand their fiscal years, like in one simple prompt, right? And that's on chat. So it was not overly complicated to do that. You can use AI to write RFPs. You can write proposals. Like you could write contracts using contract templates using AI today. The more educated you are on the prompting, the better the results are going to be. So I think that's where a lot of the education needs to happen in with AI, is around how do you tell it what you want effectively. And that is something that needs to be practiced and learned as you continue to use AI. However, this is going to be a big however. I always go back, and I think, Anders, I was telling you this the other day. I always go back to electronic invoicing. Okay. Electronic invoicing has been around for a very, 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 very long time. Like before I started in the industry, and my daughter told me over the weekend that I wasn't as ancient as somebody else. So I feel like that was a really long time ago when I started in the industry. Okay. So we've had electronic invoicing for a very long time. We are at 30% global electronic invoicing today. Okay. And part of the reason of that is because when a solution has a direct impact on your team, your headcount on your team as a leader, sometimes, I'm not saying all the time, but sometimes you tackle that a little less quickly than others. Okay. So I have this like kind of question mark in my mind about how quickly AI is going to be adopted within procurement, because historically, whether it was AP or procurement or whoever in that P2P mix, historically, we have not moved very quickly on these types of changes. So that's kind of I think it's here today. We can leverage it today. It's going to help impact us today. How quickly it goes into more of the strategic functions, the negotiations, that will all be determined by how quickly the leaders within procurement adopt it.
And I think you're right on. I forget who I was having this discussion with, right? But I kind of see now that, two companies will negotiate deals, 10 years from now with two bots just hammering it out in real time. But ultimately, it's how you set up the criteria that you're willing to accept or not. And then, you figure it out from there. So, but I think we're a ways away.
Mm-hmm.
And we partner with a bunch of AI driven companies. One, for example, that can review a third-party contract, compare it with the terms and conditions of your own master agreement, and sort of tell you where you have discrepancies and how to resolve those things. And it is brilliant. Like you can have that AI solution read a contract in 30 seconds and come up with options for you, whereas that would take somebody in legal or procurement, for that matter, like a day. So I think it's here today. And also that whole idea of supplier discovery, to say, all right, who are the other organizations out there that can give me the services? And then you can drill and drill and drill. I think that is also a very good use case for it. But I think ultimately, right now, don't take this the wrong way. Those are both tactical things in the value delivery side. And I think that's where it sits right now. And I think we will continue to come up with better and sexier ways of using AI technology to build better tactical solutions. But I think ultimately someone still has to make a decision, right?
Yeah.
And the example still was the other day, somebody got basically yelled at by a judge because the lawyer used a AI engine to come up with case law that would underline his argument. And of course, the AI bot screwed up, and he basically came up with case law that didn't actually exist.
Oh, wow.
So the AI decided to come up with his own, things that supported the argument. And of course, he got thrown out. And it's lazy, right? You still have to do the work because it's not there yet. You can't trust it yet. And I think humans still have to make decisions. They'll have to look at recommendations and say, yeah, this is something I want to do or something I don't want to do. And this is why I don't think there's going to be, a mass layoff in procurement because of AI. I think, we have, again, it's a target-rich environment for improvement. And I think most, CPOs or heads of procurement will continue to invest where it makes sense and make their people more efficient and effective.
Yeah, and I think it just, I absolutely agree with you. I think it's also puts a different maybe lens and focus on procurement skill sets that are needed within organizations. Like I can see, because of AI, relationships being being able to build trusted relationships with your stakeholders and understand the business and be one of those people, I think is going to be really important as we move forward, because you're still, as your point, Anders, you're still going to need to make decisions, and you're still going to need to know the strategy of the business and what is needed to operate the AI effectively, right? So I think those skill sets are going to continue to kind of come up to the forefront within procurement as we move forward.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, as you guys saying, AI is a tool. It's not a magic bullet. And that seems to be the general feeling. But as with many things, right now, I guess we'll see. 2 years.
Yeah.
We'll be sitting in a webinar and seeing what AI is up to, and that'll be interesting. So
we're not even going to be here, Maya. It's just going to be our AI duplicates.
we'll be on the beach.
Our avatars, yeah.
We'll send our metaverse selves to go and do the webinar. So hopefully you guys, your metaverse selves will be in attendance again. So funny. Anyhow, let's move on to question 6, which is going to be, how can procurement organizations become more strategic? I know you guys have touched on this a little bit, but I'm sure you have more to say. So let's hear it.
You want to take it first, Anders? Or you want me to?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I certainly can, right? I think ultimately, procurement needs to take a look at themselves or itself to see all the things we can bring to the table, right? And basically communicate that better and get participation at the highest level rather than being relegated to tactical functions. And I think you do that based on what you report, the value that you bring, the relationships that you can have with senior executives in the organization, the relationships that you can have with the suppliers and their executives as well. Procurement is a team sport. And if we treat it as anything else, we're destined to be tactical, right? Because essentially, if we could become the order processors or the transaction processors, I think that's not a good place for us to be. And we certainly won't be strategic. And it's okay to be a transactional processing shop if that's all you aspire to be, or if that's what the organization needs. But I think, we need to step out of our own way and really start being a business partner. And I think a lot of organizations tend to fall into that trap of, we're just so busy, we can't be strategic. And of course, there's some truth to that, right? If all the organization wants to do is just slam transactions through the pipeline, then that's fine. But you have to be able to step back, look above the clouds, and sort of figure out what you need to do in the greater picture. And you do that through relationships, better technology, better information, so you can add value every step along the way. It's kind of motherhood apple pie, but it's true.
I actually don't know if I have too much to add to that, Anders. That was a really good response. My initial thought to the answer to this question is creativity, right? How do you build that? To me, is the number one mission that every procurement organization should have right now, and I think a lot of them do, right? Whether we were forced to or we strategically did that, but I think the more creative we can be, the more strategic we're going to be. So if you can find creative solutions on the tech front, if you can find creative ways to forge relationships, if you can find creative ways to solve problems, if you can, any type of creativity within procurement right now is going to really propel us forward. And I always joke around, and Anders, I don't know if you feel this way too, but I wish that when I was in procurement that I had the experience of either working with a small business or leading a small business, so I could have a better perspective around the overall pulls and takes and motivations of businesses, of my suppliers. I think I would have been a much more effective procurement leader if I would have understood what it takes to run a business more. And now I'm like, oh, if I only, right? Looking back on it. But if you ever have the opportunity, for anyone listening, to engage with a small business, be on their board, be an advisor, or even lead a little side hustle yourself, I think it makes you a much more creative procurement professional.
I think you're right. I mean, an example comes to mind. And now that I'm on this side of the table, I had a customer come to me and say, I need to understand all these different products that we have contracted and what's our usage of them. And clearly, they were coming at me for savings, right? And I sort of laid it all out, like, yep, this is what you got. We threw in a bunch of stuff for free. And, it's so that you can expand the product. And, the other person said, well, I don't want to pay for those anymore. So lower my price. I'm like, well, you're not paying for them today. So so I can take nothing away from nothing. And I knew the chief procurement officer of that organization because I'm an old dog. I've been around the track, and I sent him a message saying, "Hey, dude, what's going on here?" And he got back to me and go, "Oh, we're trying to cut costs in the organization." I was like, "Well, why didn't this person just say that?" Right? Why didn't they just say that? Because then we can have an open dialogue about it. Like, rather than coming at me with procurement 101, like do work, break down everything that is, and what can we remove? Like, I get it because it's a tool in the tool chest, but it's not the only tool in the tool chest. And sometimes just being open and honest with your intentions and your needs goes a long way. And that's a little off topic, but don't always just follow the sourcing methodology.
Yeah. Yeah. And seeing in the bigger picture, Anders, like your technology could have delivered additional incremental savings versus just the cost of whatever they were trying to cut out of the contract. So there's that bigger picture, like take a step back and make sure that we're prioritizing those conversations correctly and understanding that long-term impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's some even just general nuggets of knowledge in there. I like that. Running a side having business understanding, understanding of how to work a business, helping in procurement and everywhere, I'm sure. So definitely good to hear. Let's move on to our last question, I believe, and that is, how will procurement tools help in mitigating negative ESG impacts? That's a really hot button topic. So let's hear what you guys have to say.
Anders, I'm going to keep my answer short on this. I know you have a ton of passion in this area, and I actually, I think we have a long way to go with the procurement tool sets when it comes to ESG. That's my personal opinion. I think there are great tools out there today that are looking at historical buying patterns, and so that you can, like, our supplier diversity stuff right today is very historical focused or supplier selection focused. So there's could be so much more that you can do with that. Same with sustainability. Like, I feel like we're just scratching the surface on sustainability tool sets when it comes to ESG impacts. And I think what's going to probably propel this forward is a lot of regulation coming our way. That's my general thought process. Like, I feel like a lot of the work that's being done with ESG today is brilliant people getting it done, and a tool set that needs to come a very long way.
Yeah, I mean, so I think most people, when they think of ESG, they only think about the environmental aspect of it. So ESG is an environmental impact, social impact, and then governance, right? So that's a very, very broad topic. So the E in ESG is done today through either figuring out what your carbon footprint, for example, is using the spend method, which I don't necessarily agree with, but if you don't have a lot of other tools available, that's typically what you will use. And then reporting on it, which is not really, a report doesn't actually impact anything, right? The social responsibility part of it is things like diversity and inclusion and other things. And then governance are the stuff that we're already doing today, to the most part, like collecting SOC 2s and doing other things like that. So I think procurement tools need to evolve to include all of these things as standard fare as part of the selection process. And you need to have goals at the top of the house for each and every one of these things. Because again, if you don't measure it, if you don't have goals, no one's going to care. And that's, I mean, not that I want to, of course I do, but not to sell focal point, but that's kind of what we're establishing, right? So you can set things out at the top of the house and attract them in each silo independently, but part of a sourcing engagement. So that way, if you care about the carbon footprint, there's a carbon footprint baseline goal and savings in the project. So that helps it be another selection criteria alongside with price and other terms like that. And I think until we start thinking about these other things as a selection criteria, then it will become an afterthought. And I think that's where I see this evolving now. Like there are some great tools out there today, but I think ultimately organizations are going to have to own their own environmental sustainability, social responsibility, and governance goals themselves. Like I think there are a lot of good tools out there that say, all right, vendor A has got an A+ rating in environmental sustainability. Like that doesn't mean anything, right? When you have to report on your carbon footprint reduction, having a bunch of A+ companies is not going to help you there, right? So you need to be able to report with confidence that here's my baseline, here's my new, and that's what that's how we got there. But not only that, but you need to figure out what the denominator is, right? So what are you measuring against? So for example, when you were at MGM Resorts, was it square foot facilities managed? Was it room nights per year? Like, what is the thing that you're measuring against? And that is also important, right? Because as we all know, like we're in procurement, right? So if you decide to shut down a bunch of buildings, is that procurement savings? Probably not where I come from. If you shut down a bunch of buildings, do you become more efficient from a carbon footprint perspective? Maybe not, I don't know, right? So the devil's in the detail. So I think just taking other people's word for it is not going to be good enough anymore. So people need to stand up these types of functions themselves and manage it end to end. And I think that's where the hard part comes in. Just like when banking regulations came in, and this vendor is going to great D&B score. Well, the regulators don't care. The supplier failed, right? And it's because you didn't collect the information and evaluate it yourself. You didn't know. And I think that's where we need to get to with all these other things as well.
For sure, super interesting, and baking that into the process, I think, like you said, is crucial for success in that area. So, super interesting. Again, now I don't see any questions in the chat this very second. If anybody would like to send one, or have a question, a comment to submit for extra consideration, we do have a few minutes to go over some extra content. But I do want to thank Anders and Amanda for all of your wisdoms, all of your insights. Definitely appreciate it. I think I learned a lot. And so yeah, we'll take a moment. If anybody has anything to drop in the chat, please feel free. If not, you will get communication with the recording if you would like to share with anybody else. And we hope to see you at the next one as well.
All right. I see people starting to drop off a little bit.
All righty.
Yeah. And Anders, I just wanted to thank you again for this opportunity and our partnership between Wonder Services and Focal Point. We really enjoy the relationship and the mission at hand for us both. So thank you again for inviting me to do this with you today.
No, our pleasure indeed. And we appreciate you guys as well. So thanks everybody for joining us, and please let us know if we can help in any way, shape, form, or fashion.
All right. Have a lovely week, everybody.
Thank you.